have a microphone? All right, folks, thank you all for being here. My name is Soham. I'm one of the two founders of Interview Kickstart. If you're here, you probably cannot miss it. There are a few posters and everything around here. We are in a nutshell, just to get going, we are a school for technical interview prep, as you might know. We have been around for about 5 years. We have about 2,500 alumni all across US. We have generated offers north of $100 million at this point. And the focus is to crack technical interviews at some of the toughest companies, or what they say, FAANG companies. For those of you who do not know, FAANG or FAANG, depending on who you ask. Well, it is not a government certified acronym, it's just sort of human certified acronym. Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. And we'll elaborate on that a little bit later. We are here for a panel discussion of hiring managers from these companies. Generally, very difficult to actually get hiring managers from top companies talking at one place at one time. When you are interviewing, the interviewing process, easy to get a hold of recruiters. It's easy to hear from them much more than it is to hear from hiring managers. So figured we should have a little chat with hiring managers as well. Just wanted to introduce the panel today. Nikhil is at Google in one of the core engineering teams. And a very delightful guy, a very happy, delightful guy. I've had very good conversations with him over time. That's him. Monal, same thing. Nikhil is a coach on our platform, our InterviewKickstart platform. So is Monal. Monal teaches, he's at Netflix, and very good on the system design side of things. Like when he teaches system design, the reviews are just stellar. As well, welcome, Nikhil, Monal. Thank you for being here. Geraldo is at Facebook. He manages one of the teams at Facebook. Geraldo we got to know last year. Before that, he worked at HackerRank, doing a lot of their content, possibly all of their content as well, managing that. Thank you, welcome, please. Yanni and we've known each other for a long time now. Lord knows, like 5 years or something like that, or 4 years,
and
whatever.
He's still here.
He's still here, despite knowing me for so long. And Yanni is also a coach on our platform, so is Geraldo. Yanni teaches concurrency extremely well. Some of his reviews you should read, it's amazing. Anyway, he's at Apple. He was an engineering manager on Siri, and he's now at one of their stealth projects. So do not ask him what it is. I want to be very clear, the opinions and the discussion are not the company's necessarily. These are their personal opinions from their own cognitive understanding of how the world works, and don't necessarily just line it up to the companies. Yeah? So with that, I'll let Ryan take over. Ryan is my partner in crime for Interview Kickstart. He used to work at Excel Partners before this. Excel Partners is one of the top VC firms. Excel has invested in practically all big names that you have heard of. Dropbox and Slack and a number of other things. Facebook. He was there, Facebook as well. He was there for 5 years. I'll let Ryan go from here. Yeah?
Okay, so as you can tell, we seem to be missing somebody from Amazon.
That's right.
It's no bias against Amazon, right? Not at all. We actually had a last-minute cancellation, and so Soham is going to be stepping in,
yep.
right? Because while this is a FAANG panel, the reality is that if you look at the top companies, right, even beyond this, LinkedIn, Uber, Airbnb, Box, Dropbox, they all have very tough interview processes, quite challenging. And so Soham's going to be stepping in. Also, Soham has thought more deeply about technical interviews than really I think was conceivable. So he's going to be adding some stuff to this as well. Okay, so just quick anecdote to get started, right? I have a question. Who knows how the acronym FAANG came about? Now, obviously, it stands for what it stands, but does anybody know who came up with the acronym? Close. Jim Cramer and Mad Money.
That was impressive.
That's very impressive. I thought
we
nobody
weren't
would know
expecting that.
Yeah, I thought nobody would know that. Exactly.
Yes.
Jim Cramer, in one of his moments on Mad Money, came up with FAANG, and now it's stuck. Also, quick show of hands. How many of you here have either thought of or are thinking of applying to any of the FAANG companies? Oh, everybody, great. Somebody asked me the other day, what is the one question that all software engineers think about at least once in their life? That is the question. That is the question. Usually multiple times in your life, because many people fail the first time around, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be asking a bunch of questions. We'll try and glean some insight. Some of it is generic across the companies, and we'll try to get some specific insights on specific companies as well, and then we'll have a lot of opportunity for everybody to ask questions. So, first question to each of you. Maybe Yanni, we start from you, this direction. Why do you work at Apple?
Well, why I work at Apple is half why I work anywhere,
Okay.
and half why I work at Apple specifically. So why I work anywhere is I talk to people, and I look for opportunities, and sometimes opportunities present themselves. For example, I'm wearing right now a Bloomberg hoodie. And if you look at my LinkedIn, I've worked at Intel and AMD and Microsoft and Apple and Bloomberg. You might say, well, why Bloomberg? Well, because I met a guy. I responded to a recruiter, and I met a guy, and I wanted a free trip to New York, because why not? And then they told me, well, we actually are opening up an office in San Francisco. Do you want to come and be the first local hire and help this guy open the office in San Francisco? And I thought, well, that's something I've never done. Right? So a lot of times I choose companies based on something I've never done. It doesn't have to be FAANG, or it doesn't have to be a top-tier name. Now, why Apple? Apple gave me one of these unique opportunities. I'm more a concurrency, as Soham mentioned, concurrency, low-level, like AAA games, streaming video person. And I met a guy who sold his startup to Apple, Daniel Gross, who's a really cool guy. And he was really excited about hiring very technical managers. And they were working on NLP ML, which I'd never done before. But he said, look, you're a smart guy. You can figure it out. And so I joined that team for that opportunity. So that's how I got to Apple.
Awesome. Geraldo, what makes you work at Facebook?
Yes, good question. Well, I failed the Google interview, so I ended up with Facebook. That's a joke.
As we said, these are opinions of your own.
Exactly. No, I'm kidding. Actually, funny thing is, today is exactly 5 years. I got a reminder on my phone from my first on-site with Facebook, which I failed 5 years ago. And now I'm kind of like happy to be here as a hiring manager from Facebook. Eventually, I made it in. Why Facebook? For me, I kind of always wanted to go to one of the FAANG companies. What made me choose Facebook specifically is that I'm finding the right balance of all the perks and all the advantages of working at a big company. Compensation, perks, they really treat us well there. But at Facebook, I feel like the pace of learning, the pace of work, there is still a little bit of that hack culture that is still alive. At least I see it in my team now. I see it everywhere around it. So the pace of learning and just overall kind of that pace of work, you don't get that like big company slow down that some people say happens in the other companies. So for me, it made sense, that kind of balance. On top of that, more specifically, when I interviewed, and I've only been there for about 5 months now, I really connected and clicked well with the team that I'm managing now, with the hiring manager, with the director, with the entire organization. So it was also from like a people perspective. I really enjoyed, like from all the interviews that I went, it was like my favorite day of on-sites ever. So that was the kind of like a personal reason, the second one.
Cool. Thanks, Geraldo. Monal?
Again,
apart from all the great shows.
Thank you, yeah. So again, a quick disclaimer, I'm here for myself. What you hear is from me, not representing anybody. I think I never looked at joining Netflix as like it's a big company. I look at a few things. For me, it was the unique culture, which I don't think is for everyone. So if you should really look into it, what it means to you, and if it's actually going to work for you. Second one was opportunities for impact. I've pretty much worked in most of the areas that Netflix functions internally. I worked on building their media cloud infrastructure, I built stream processing platforms, I've done large-scale data stores inside out. So ability to work on the cloud and at scale, I think those 4 things were the reasons why I ended up at Netflix, and I've been there for about 8 years now. So.
Wow, it's a long time. Nikhil, Google, what makes you stay at Google?
So if you ask the question to my wife, her only answer is the food. While it is as close as it gets, Google has been one of my dream companies that I always wanted to join, and I'm glad I actually entered into it. And I would say if I had to put my finger on one reason why I kind of continue to stay there and probably stay there for some time to come, is let's say you're in a meeting room or you're discussing a problem at Google for any situation, you can practically be sure that you are never the smartest man in the room. That to me has been one of the most interesting learning place at Google, because you just cannot be the smartest man in the room at Google. And that's it. That is the reason I'm going to stay there for a while.
Okay, excellent. Soham, you want to talk about your time at Box? Why did they hire you?
That's a top secret, man. Why would they hire me? Now, pretty quickly. So I was coming out of eBay. One thing eBay had done really well was scale.
Sorry, for those of you who don't know, Soham was the first director of engineering at Box. He
Yes.
stayed with Box to the IPO.
I didn't join as OPC director. I joined
Yeah.
as an IC, and then I moved up. But Box was looking to scale at the time, and of the few companies that had actually scaled, this is 2008, sorry. eBay was one that had done really good scale, and that's how I got hired. And my one condition when I got hired was that I will work everywhere in the stack. Like you can't tell me to just work here and that's it, because that's how I had done that at eBay, and they laughed at me literally and said, "Of course you don't know what a startup is, do you?" I'm like, "Yes, I don't. This was my first startup to work in." And since then, I worked an entire stack. There was a point when I knew the entire stack inside and out of that company. So I wanted that feeling, I wanted that impact, and the company gave me. Even today, I think Box is one of the best kept secrets in the Bay Area. Like a really good culture, like no asshole culture. It's really supportive, fun culture as well there. But that's why I stayed
I actually
too.
realized I asked you the wrong question. I should have asked you, why do you work at Interview Kickstart?
I suppose I work at Kickstart to just have fun, but yes.
Okay,
No.
so the one of the things that is common across all of these companies is that the hiring bar is really high, right? They have incredibly tough interview processes, very challenging. Geraldo talked about how he just got that reminder 5 years later, and he's happy to be there. So what I want to do is, we know that there are 3 or 4 areas that all of these companies look at, right? We know that they look at algorithmic interviews, system design interviews, domain-specific interviews, behavioral interviews, broadly, right? So I'm going to go very quickly down the pack, maybe start with Nikhil this time. If you guys could just tell me what the typical mix is. Is there a typical mix? Is there any area that they focus on particularly more versus the others? Anything, is there any type of area within algorithms that, you tend to get more questions by luck or, whatever? Just give me a mix and a sense of what the interview process is like very quickly.
So very quickly, I have to go through it, right? The most important thing over here is if you get like 5 or 6 rounds, the most important thing is you don't have to ace all the rounds, actually, is one thing I would like to specify over here. So if you go into your first round and if it does not turn out well, that's absolutely fine, because every round is different. Every interview feedback is sent out differently. And across all these companies, I'm guessing there is a panel sitting outside who have no idea about what these things are doing. So that would be my only one thing. Like every round is different. And if you mess up one round, it's still not end of story at all.
And in terms of a mix, Nikhil, is there some sort of, is there more focus on technical, more focus on behavioral? Do you see any of those patterns at all? Not relevant question.
I think the behavioral part is interesting because you can only fail a behavioral round. You can't like ace it. So behavioral round cannot be a thing that, okay, this person is so amazing in behavioral that let's let it go on the technical side. But if you are really an a-hole, as he pointed out some time back, then it's going to be a problem.
And so on the technical side, what are the types of areas that, let's say, mix of types of questions? Scale.
It's at least at Google, however many interviews I have done or I have read the feedback from the interviewers, it's always about take the simplest problem, scale it. That has been the theme throughout. So it could be the easiest problem of reversing a string, but once you make it to go scale, how do you do that is always I've seen.
Okay. Monal, what about you? Is there any area that Netflix, I know you guys have this really unique culture, right? Which I'm going to come to, but in the general interview process, is there any area that they focus on more or less?
So let me give a little bit of context, right? So at Netflix, the teams, and the manager hires for the team. What that means is you're not getting hired for the company. You're not getting hired for a central committee to vote on you. It's a team that decides what gaps there are in the teams, what skill sets they need, and they'll look for a person that can come at that skill or increase the skill level of the whole team, right? So you're coming in to raise the level of the team. So every team's experience might be slightly unique, although there's a common ground across all of them. And so there's technical, there's behavioral, and both of them carry equal weight. So you have to kind of be good at both. The reason for that is a portion of it is culture, right? I mean, we look at hiring senior people, we give them the freedom and responsibility, and we hold them responsible for doing what they do, the decisions they take. So we expect them to use good judgment, right? That means there's a lot of responsibility riding in your shoulders. And that means you might end up communicating a lot with other folks, other teams. So if you're not great at behavioral, it makes it a little challenging environment for you to succeed at, right? So that's one area. Of course, there's the base technical skill in algorithms, system design, again, scale, as I mentioned, the same thing. So I think that's one area. The second one that I see people trip over is, and again, this has been talked about before as well, is recruiters at Netflix are not recruiters in the traditional sense. They're actually true business partners to the hiring manager. They're really seasoned professionals, and so they also have a say in, a really good say in how the outcome of your interview is. So the way you interact with the recruiters, the way you work with it, but with them, they'll also be interviewing you, right? So it's sort of a HR/recruiter combination. So in addition to the, setting up your logistics around interviews, closing, if you are successful, they're also evaluating you on a behavioral perspective. So I think that's a slightly unique part.
Okay. Geraldo, anything in particular at Facebook that you've seen?
Facebook is kind of the opposite with Netflix. Most of the hiring happens in general. You don't need to be assigned to a team unless you are a senior, very specialized engineer, like let's say a senior network engineer. For the typical software engineering interviews, the team gets assigned at bootcamp later on. So what that means is the interview process is quite standardized across the company, and it does focus really on like the core skills, or basically just looking to hire smart people or people that have really like prepared well for that type of interview, which means a lot of algorithmic questions and a lot of system design questions. And it's very rare that there is domain specific or language specific or questions in the interview process.
Okay, Yanni?
I think that's one thing that is absolutely common across these companies, right? No domain-specific questions for these generalists is one thing that I would like to stress on.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Let's touch on that next. Yeah.
So Apple is like Netflix, and like a lot of companies out there, we say FAANG, and it's easy to think Google, Facebook, but think Microsoft, think HP, think these kind of companies. They do not do the hiring committee thing. They hire for a specific team. Now that doesn't mean it's necessarily a specific role on that team. If you're an engineering director and you have a 100-person org and you're hiring 10, 15 people, you might slot somebody in depending on how they do on the interview. But as you heard from my story in terms of joining Apple, it would not have been like, for example, the Google or the Facebook track where you're hiring someone who's going to be an ML manager, and so they're on the ML ladder, so they're going to get an ML generic interview. I got an engineering manager interview, and because there was a really strong fit and there was a specific profile that this person was looking for, they were willing to hire, and they could make that decision as a director by themselves. So what I'll say about this is that ask the recruiter and look online. These are not secrets. We don't hide whether we're a interview committee hiring, whether we're like a GM style, the director controls the hiring. This is not secret information. This is totally legit to ask your recruiter. Ask them what the process is. And even the questions, ask them. I always ask for all my interviews. What I do is I say, hey, can you tell me who's interviewing me? Can you send me their LinkedIn profile? And can you give me the topic area that they're going to talk to me about. And I've never heard no. Sometimes they're proactive and they just give it to you. Sometimes you ask for it and they'll prepare it. But nobody has ever said no. Why? Because it's not a secret. We're not trying to like trick you, like, oh, we're not going to tell this person we're going to ask them a scaling question, right? We want you to feel comfortable in the interview, and so we want you to be as comfortable with the process as possible. We're not going to tell you, yes, here's the question we're going to ask you, but we'll tell you we're going to talk about data structures, or hey, make sure you're familiar with hash tables and lists, or these kind of things that allow you to feel comfortable when you come in terms of the general area you're looking at. So ask your recruiter. Be open with them. Say, hey, can you tell me who I'm going to talk to? Can you tell me the general areas? And the LinkedIn page is always great because we talked about behavioral. Connecting with people is important. Maybe less so at Facebook and Google because it goes to committee and they don't have a direct role in hiring you. But in any team that's going to hire you directly, and I do this as a hiring manager, I ask everybody, do you want to work with this person? Right? And the way you get everyone to say yes is you do well behaviorally. And one way to do well behaviorally is to know who you're talking to and to talk to them the way they expect to be spoken to. So if you look on people's LinkedIn page and you say, hey, this person who's going to interview a third person, they are low-level concurrency people. Well, you can talk about that. If the next person is a marketing person who's there to get your product experience, don't talk to them about registers on CPUs. Like that's not going to help you, right? So I think if you approach it that way, you can get a lot of insight before you show up and be more comfortable.
Awesome. So that's really interesting, right? Because we have 4 folks here. It's split 2 and 2, right? So 2 sets of companies hire via hiring committees, and 2 it's more the team, right? So very interesting, right? To understand the nuances and prepare accordingly. Now,
Before we go, let me add one more comment.
Please.
So another nuance is when you apply to Netflix, the internal recruiting machinery is extremely well connected. So if they find that you're more suited for a different role, or there are a couple of roles that you're really well suited for, then they'll automatically match you as well. So we're mindful so that we can get you to the right team and make sure you're really successful. So sometimes when you apply, they might say, hey, there's another role that might be more suitable or more exciting for you. Do you want to check it out or not? So you'll have an option if they find something else for you.
Interesting. That's another reason not to screw up on the behavioral side, right? Because you want people to connect you. Okay, so on the behavioral side, maybe I start with Monal, and then I have a follow-up question for Soham. So on the behavioral side, Monal, Netflix is known to have this, like, I read their doc, right? This radical culture, radical openness, if I'm not mistaken, right? It's actually quite amazing, right? It's quite amazing to read. I think the only other company that I've seen which has put out stuff in a similar vein is Amazon, right, with their 14 leadership principles. So talk to us about the behavioral interview process a bit, right? We've talked about the technicals, it's algorithms, data structures, system design. What are you asking on the behavioral side of stuff?
So I think everything is out there in the open. People don't realize, like, it's the same document that's out there is the same document we use internally. We don't have a second version of it or a third version of it. It's the same thing that you guys get to see online is what we get to see. So whatever culture attributes there are, and anytime you connect with Netflix, the first thing they'll send you out is a link to the culture deck, right? They say, read it if you have any questions. So that's the first thing. I mean, take a look at it thoroughly, see if attributes of it resonate with you, or if you have any questions, be curious about it. And most of the behavioral stuff, it's there. I mean, they're telling you what they're looking for in very explicit terms in over 10 plus pages, right? So you just have to go through it. Like, there's freedom, there's responsibility, there's context of control. Do you work in an environment where you're more self-driven, right? All these kind of attributes kind of come directly from these principles. So I'd say just read the document, and if you're able to exude those characteristics when you're working, then you'd be a great fit. If you see, hey, there's half of the things here actually don't make sense to me, I don't like it, then you may actually not like working on Netflix, right? So I think that's a good thing that they put it completely out there, and so you have a better idea of what's going to happen internally, right? You can take one of those 9 to 10 attributes that we internally follow culture-wise, and there's a detailed paragraph on it, so you know actually what happens. You get a glimpse of it internally, and you can ask as many questions you want to the recruiter on any of those areas, or the hiring manager when they talk to you. So you can go into depth of any of those culture areas, and you can ask them, like, what does this mean? What are you looking for? And they'll be happy to actually answer all the questions.
Awesome. So I don't know if you guys picked up on something that Geraldo said just now. It was a very passing comment, but it was a really interesting comment. And I want to go to that. So Geraldo said, I'm not sure you caught it, Facebook interviews are set up to hire the smartest people or the people who prepare, right? And it just moved on after that, right? But that's the reality, right? And so I want to talk to all four of you about, you guys have ended up in companies that people are desperate to get at, right? And what did you guys do? So, maybe start with who have I not started with so far? Nikhil. No, I have started with Nikhil. Yeah, Geraldo. Right. So how did you guys, let's go one by one, right? How did you guys prepare? Just, talk to folks about how they can prepare.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So my background is a little unique because I came from HackerRank, and HackerRank is in a similar space where people use the site to practice for coding interviews, and also the kind of like the main offering of the product to businesses is how can companies be better at testing the skills of engineers. So in a way, I cheated the system a little bit because I was on the inside of it literally day in and day out. I was working on coding questions, algorithmic questions with my team. But apart from that, kind of like side note, in general, I would say that it does take a lot of work and a lot of preparation. Even if you knew how to do this kind of interviewing, let's say like 3-4 years ago, and now you are considering of changing jobs, the skill set for interviewing is not the exact same thing as what you're doing on a day-to-day basis as an engineer, for good or for bad. And that we could have a whole other session about kind of like the interview process right now. But overall, I want to say a few things. Basically, it does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of practice. I would say, reading books, going online and practicing coding exercises as much as possible, or attending a kind of a real kind of like bootcamp experience like Interview Kickstart are going to put you at a much, much higher chance of succeeding into these interviews. The good thing is you don't have to prepare in a different way for the different companies. Even like smaller companies and startups, they do follow a very similar format of interviewing. Even as a manager at HackerRank, I was talking to a lot of hiring managers in the industry in Silicon Valley. The guidelines that I was personally giving them was keep your interviews as general as possible, keep them in a way as similar to Google, Facebook's, Apple's interviews as possible, because you're going to lose out on candidates because people are preparing kind of like a certain way for those interviews. You need to compare kind of like, apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So overall, the guideline in the industry was try to keep the interviewing as standardized as possible, focusing on core skills and not make it domain specific. So long story short, practicing a lot for this type of interviewing, this type of technical interviewing pays off in the end, and I really like studying and putting in the effort.
Okay. Yanni, how did you prepare, dude?
Well, everything he said. What I would say is I optimize for certain things in my career, and it depends what you're optimizing for. Some people like to be somewhere 20 years, and that's cool. Me, I like to try different things every now and then, so every 3-4 years I end up moving. And part of that is because whenever you think of the next challenge, it's probably not right in front of you, it's probably like down there. Part of it is in Silicon Valley, we have 4-year vests on our RSUs, and you don't always get the best deals staying where you're at. It's just the way the world works. So what I would add to this is saying that I practice in ways that are artificial for me, but are natural in the interview. So for example, when I code, I don't just code on my computer. I'll write it down with a paper and pencil, or I'll write it on the whiteboard, right? Because it's a different skill. It's a different way of thinking. You don't write code on the whiteboard every day. You just don't, right? So just take that variable away. Don't just practice that so you don't need to think about it, right? And what you really are practicing is not a specific problem. It's just getting that mindset, like remembering how a hash table works inside. You don't have to remember the perfect hash table. You don't have to be familiar with like papers on this. No one's ever going to use this crappy hash table I wrote in my interview. But I just need the general concepts, the basic idea. And I just need to refresh that because as an IC and now as an engineering manager for so long, I don't deal with this stuff every day. So just bring it up and bring it up in the context, in the way that I'm going to have to present it in the interview.
Awesome. Monal?
Um,
You just
So-
watch a whole bunch of Netflix shows?
Yeah, you just watch a bunch of Netflix shows. I think I'll break it down into three things, right? Anytime you go into an interview, you're there to impress them. You're there to show what your skill sets are. So you have a pretty short window in proving that, whether it's tech, whether it's behavioral, whether it's system design. So I think it takes some prep to figure out how you're going to concisely put yourselves across, how you're going to concisely express yourself, right? On a day-to-day basis, you get multiple chances. You're in meetings, you can go back to your colleague on your desk, you can tap on the shoulder and correct yourself, or if you think about something else, you can go back and do it, right? Here you have to be really alert, make sure you've practiced how you use certain terminology, certain phrases that are common when you want to express something. So you end up saving a little bit more time when you're expressing things, right? So I think that helps really in the system design. Coding, of course, it's been covered. You have to, practice on the board, good use of the whiteboard. And with behavioral, just practice a few questions that you think you might get. Try and anticipate a few things. And see how you'd communicate about it. Like, for example, tell me something about what you've been doing in your team, right? What's your role? That's an amazing time to shine. Like, if you don't have an elevator pitch, then you kind of lose out on it. So that first 1 or 2 minutes, nail it down if you have to write it down. Like, showcase what you did, like how your role was crucial in your team. How did it end up impacting the team? What technical skills that you either learned or leveraged to kind of make that happen? So I think those, sometimes you have those 1 to 5 minutes to kind of really shine the balls in your court. So I think it's extremely important to kind of prep for that, right? Yeah, if I think of any, I'll add.
Nikhil, how did you prepare?
So I'll probably share my own story that might be the most apt over here. And I'll share the story starting from 5 years back when I thought I was doing really good at my previous job. Kind of really happy with the team, the work that we were doing. And then when a recruiter called, I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. I went and failed, really bad. And I'm like, wait, what just happened over here? I thought I was doing really well and it didn't work out. And then I took a pause from this whole thing. 3 years later, I was again interviewing. But this time it was a little different. And that's where I would like to categorize myself in a block. And, people hate categorizing, but I will do it anyways. So I feel like, when I was trying to go out there interviewing, I belong to the second category, which probably is the biggest lot of the 3 categories I'm going to describe. One is those kind of people who are the real go-getters, who really know algorithm data structures really well. They know the ins and outs of technology really, really well. And at the same time, they might also happen to be amazing at behavioral rounds. So they don't need to do anything. They just need to go out there, step into interview process, 1, 2, 3, someone will catch them, and in they are. I knew I was not that guy. So realizing that was the biggest kind of aha moment for me. And well, I knew it, but let's just acknowledge it. And second was this big category in the middle where probably most of us, I'm just going to claim it, fall, where it's like we are good at what we do, we probably suck at some other things, but it may or may not be converting when we actually step into an interview round. If you belong to this category, I was there. And then there's this third who probably are just not meant for software. They have some other calling. I belong to the second. And the one thing that changed my whole setup was kind of preparing for it. So either you can do it this way, where you can say, I'll keep interviewing, and over the year, I'll end up somewhere. That's one way of going about interviews. So you basically go every interview every 2 months and then find a job and join that. Or other kind, is like, I'm going to really interview. I'm going to change this thing, and I'm going to change one time only. So I'm going to prepare for it. This is where I started preparing a lot. I think I made a decision in January as a resolution that I'm going to change a company. By February, I started really preparing. And then in February, I took vacation. I marked a vacation day in my calendar for May or June for 14 days. And in those 14 days, I was going to interview at all the top 10 companies is what I had decided in February. And then I prepared in March. And those 14 days of that 2 weeks, I interviewed at 10 top-tier companies and converted many of them. That was the difference in my preparation in those 5 months versus what I had done before. And at a time, I was very happy to say, like, okay, there were 5 companies, top tier, who were ready to hire me. Like, they were competing with each other. That does not happen for me. So yeah, I mean, that's how I landed it. It took me about 5 months, and I'm just glad it happened.
Okay, awesome. No, thank you for sharing. So, Soham, based on what we see at work, right, when we are working, so we work with a whole bunch of folks. Talk about the prep process, right? What are you seeing people do? What do you see people do when they come to the course? What do you see people doing beyond that? How are they actually preparing for these interviews?
Not very different from what everybody has said here. Like, the path that, what we have done is we have structured this entire path, right, through this. So people coming to the program know where to start, where to end, how much effort to put where. Generally, 2 to 4 months, 4 months, 5 months, right? Some people take longer, 8 to 8 months, but very persistently people prepare on algorithms, on data structures, on system design, on a variety of system design things, as well as behavioral. So pretty much exactly in line, a little bit on domain stuff as well.
Okay, so, one thing I just want to add very quickly. Yeah, Nikhil, sorry, you want to say something?
Mock interviews,
Yeah,
whether it is
right.
your friends or go to LinkedIn, there are people who take mock interviews, or IK does mock interviews. Yeah. Mock interviews change the game. Like, you being in that setup, at least for me, being in that setup, doing those mock interviews, 10s of them, and then going to an interview was very, very, very different. Once again, either you are that category number 2, or if you're 1, we're at the wrong place right now.
Yeah. No, so that's actually exactly what I was going to point out. Right. The thing about this interview process is that you don't get feedback, right? And so because there's no feedback loop, it's very difficult to get better, right? You're essentially flying blind. So whenever you're preparing, to Yanni's point, right, it was a very good point, and Nikhil's mentioned the same thing, is simulate those environments, right? Get yourself into a deliberate practice kind of situation, right? Do mock interviews, do stuff on whiteboard, actually time yourself when you're solving questions, right? It's a lot about prep. Now, sorry, Soham, you want to say something?
We should watch the time.
Yeah, I was just looking at the time. So, last couple of questions before we throw this open. To each of you, what is the one thing you wish somebody told you 5 years ago, which you think will help folks now? Who have I started with everybody?
About interviews.
Let's go back. Yeah, about interviewing, about changing. Nikhil, you want to start?
I'll say one line, which I sincerely believe now. Interviewing is not an art, it's a skill, is what I say now after clearing it. So it's not an art, it's a skill.
Okay, Mono.
I think keeping a tab on the evolving space, though, in the sense that if you're not in the market for a while, the market space and the way the interview is changing so much that it helps to get a gauge of what are they asking now, right? It's significantly different from what it used to be 4 or 5 years ago versus what it's now, and it's constantly evolving.
Okay, great.
For me, I think it will be things that already got mentioned a little bit, but mock interviews and whiteboarding. When I was failing 5 years ago, when I failed the Facebook interview and a few others, I had only practiced by coding on my laptop and not putting myself on the real mindset of interviews. I went through a loop of like not managing to get offers, and then I went back and like with mock interviews, with whiteboards, by looking at real interview questions. So putting yourself in that mindset for as long as possible is what made a difference.
Superb. Yanni? You advise a lot of folks on the platform as well,
Yeah, I guess
right?
the one thing I would add, everything people have said so far is really important, probably even more important than what I'm about to say. But what I will say is every one of us have interviewed and failed. And so you should never approach this as 100%.
Excellent.
No one gets 100%. So you should talk to people, but don't emotionally invest everything in one interview. Google, Facebook. Talk to lots of different companies and be open to them. Because one thing I didn't realize, my first company, I interned at a company because my mom had worked there, and then I went to Microsoft. And so early in my career, I was always in a big company. And sometimes you get these random opportunities, like the Bloomberg opportunity I told you guys about. Be open to the opportunities, right? If you're open to those opportunities, you can talk to 5, 6, 7 companies. You only need one at the end, right? So don't think you have to do 100%. And don't feel bad if you don't get 100%.
So, what's the one thing that you wish people told you 5 years ago?
It's a date, not a test.
It's a date.
Interviews are a date, it's not a test. You have to prepare for it like it's a test, and at the end of the day, it's a date. And you have to convince the other person that you want to work with, they want to work with you. Right? That is a big part of it. Right? That's a big part of it. If you can convince that and you are on the fence on the technical side, it'll still go in your favor. Right?
I think somebody here said something really interesting. Your goal at the date is to get the second date.
Yes, it's a speed date, right?
It's
5
exactly
speed
true.
dates on the day
It's
of. Right? Think of it like that.
It's a speed date. You know, on a lighter note, when I was coming on board to join IK as a co-founder, and Soham told me this, he said, you know, this interview is a date. I thought to myself, I think this guy's got this all wrong. But it makes so much of sense, right? You can't predict the outcome. It's not a standardized test. Okay, so before I throw this open to questions, a couple of interesting things that have come up today that I just want to wrap up with, and then we're going to take a couple of questions because we are running out of time. One, I think, is the fact that while these companies are all out there, there are nuances to all these companies, some in the way they hire, like hiring committees versus non-hiring committees. So there are differences. A lot of this stuff is out there to the points that they made, right? You know, go online, read about it. It's a well-documented process. Go, look, make the effort. A second point. Third point, everybody prepares. Everybody prepares. You know, the sad fact of the matter is that people don't say they prepared, right? But everybody prepares.
Now they say it also.
All the top companies send out prep material for you to go through. And if you think about it, if Yanni is sitting in an interview, he is a super valuable resource. So is Geraldo, so is Monal, so is Nikhil. The company doesn't want them to waste their time. So Soham, right? Companies don't want to waste their time, right? They don't want the engineers to waste their time. They want the engineers to be building the world-changing products that they're known for. They are investing really valuable resources in these folks coming to interview you. All these guys are actually trained interviewers, right? So you must prepare. They want you to prepare. Number three, the third interesting point is it's not only about technical prep. You also need to prepare behaviorally, right? That's not something most engineers think about, right? You don't have to pass every round. Nikhil brought up the point. You can afford to make mistakes and still get in. Everybody fails. This is not a 100% hit rate. There's no way you should be completely dejected. Pick up, move on. Second attempt at Facebook, Google. Yanni talked about failing. Everybody's talked about failing, right? That is a key learning in this process, right? And the last point is that today there is no ambiguity in how you should prepare. There are structured, very concise approaches. IK is one of them, right? But they are out there. They involve taking time, preparing. We believe that it makes sense to actually learn from experts. That's why all of these guys teach on the platform. You know, it only makes sense to learn from hiring managers. But there are other schools of thought as well. And simulate those environments. Tests, classes, mock interviews. Talk to these experts. It can absolutely be done. It is science. There's very little art. It's largely science, right? Now, with that, let me throw this open to questions. I think we have time only for a couple of questions, maybe 2-3 questions. So whoever wants to start, Kevin, okay, you can borrow my mic. I think I'm loud enough without the mic.
Sorry, while he's taking the mic, I thought of a very interesting thing. One really important thing while you're prepping is look at any material that's being put out by your interviewers, because you know who's going to interview you. Yeah. Look at their LinkedIn profile, look at YouTube, have they given presentations, look at what the company has put out in that domain or the team you are working for. You'll get a lot of pointers on what preference they have for scaling, what preference they have for how they build the technology, the preference of how they communicate, what they're passionate about, and just mirror some of that stuff, and you'll be on the in a good foot to start off with.
Okay, you've mentioned a few things already, but can each of you mention a favorite resource that in your preparation that you might have utilized?
Interview Kickstart.
I agree, and post that. I agree with Interview Kickstart, by the way. Post that, it would be Lead Code and Geeks for Geeks. When I was commuting, I used to just read Geeks for Geeks just for fun. It was a lot of fun, just to read it. I mean it. I still read it.
I think you covered coding, so I'll mention a few things about system design. So there's a really good book called Designing Data-Intensive Applications. That's a great book. And there's some blogs, high scalability. What I do is I look at specific companies, the top tier companies and their engineering blogs. I follow that. And if you're targeting a certain company, just lead through a bunch of blogs in the area you're interviewing for. So I think that significantly helps in a system design perspective as well.
Before interviewing for the last month, I was reading white papers all through for every major open source technology out there. And I read that in and out before interviewing.
Can you guys repeat the sites that you just mentioned? I'm not sure we follow.
High scalability.
So highscalability.org, and then each of the companies there, you can go to Google, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Uber, Lyft, name them, right? Airbnb. They have their engineering blogs, and sometimes they have interesting content they put out there. So it just takes 5 minutes to scan. If you find anything interesting, read through it. And then there's Designing Data-Intensive Systems. That's kind of a good base thing that covers everything. There's another nice open source book called Distributed Systems for Fun and Profit. It's a pretty small one. So you could just read through that. So you get a feel of what's out there for scaling systems, right?
There are some conferences that you might end up going for software architecture where there are some speakers, and I ended up following their blogs. Like Martin Kleppmann was speaking one day. I ended up following his blog, has helped tremendously.
Okay, let's just get to the next question because we don't have much time. Kevin, come to you next. Yeah, okay, why don't you start? I think they're passing them.
Sure. What is your advice for somebody who is trying to break into the industry but has limited professional experience?
Yannick, you want to? Okay, who's not? Go for it, Mark. Why don't you start then?
So I think start by putting out some projects on GitHub. I think that's a great way to showcase what you can do. If you have a open source project of interest, pick a few tickets there and get involved. It's a design ticket, documentation ticket, or a small coding ticket, right? So that way you establish experience even before you get in.
So, you want to add anything to for somebody who's just breaking in?
No, not any more than what Mohan has said. Just expect that the road is going to be somewhat longer. You know, it is quite normal when you're trying to get in the industry, especially the bigger, better companies. It is going to be somewhat longer. These companies also have peripheral roles, so to speak. Right? These are not core software engineering roles, but like similar to software engineering, where the interview processes are slightly lighter as well. So that might be a very good stepping stone as well, like support engineering or SWOT engineering, or tier 3 customer success, which also needs bug fixes to be done. So that's a very good way to get the foot into the door as well.
I wanted to add just a small thing. Don't get stuck with just like the top 10 or top 20.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, getting your foot in the door is important. I almost disagree with Soham on these peripheral roles.
Good, excellent. Finally, some disagreement.
Yes.
If you were, I would rather pick becoming a software engineer into an unknown company than like a tech support role in a bigger company, because I've had a few friends that have been stuck in these support roles for way too long, while I've seen some friends who did the opposite approach, and a year later they managed to get an engineer.
That is correct. Unfortunately, I do not disagree with you there, but yes.
That was easy to resolve.
Right.
I was hoping for a fist fight.
Yes. How do you guys feel about the interview process in Silicon Valley? Do you feel like it's effective or something that should change, or is it broken?
Well, I guess my 2 cents on it is I'm curious what the alternative approaches are. I think for what it does, it works fairly well. You have to remember that the goal of the process isn't to hire you. It's to hire lots of people and to not make a mistake. One thing you'll learn, as I think we all know as managers at larger companies, is that it is extremely hard to get rid of people who are not performing well. Like there's a lot of documentation involved, then there's a lot of risk to the team, right? I'm sure lots of people, myself included, have worked on a team that has maybe one person who is a bad apple, let's say, and it affects the entire productivity of the team. So they are risk averse in hiring. And for being risk averse in hiring and for wanting an analytical process and not a process that minimizes subjective bias. You could say it has objective bias, and that does this really matter what we're asking you? But there's no subjective bias. It's like it's the same question whether you're a man or a woman, or whether you're 5 years experience or 10 years experience. So it's an objective process, and it's optimizing for not making a mistake. So I think in that sense, it is doing what it's doing, and it's doing a good job at it.
I'd like to sorry, go ahead.
I think there are rare cases where there have been alternate ways of how people get hired. Like if you are really good in a certain domain, some of the other stuff might be overlooked a little because they know what you're getting onto the table. The second one might be if you can show a big body of code that you've done, right? Maybe you participated in an open source project, or you ask them, like some companies give home exercise, right? You really excel, treat it like a product, give it back. They might be a little lenient on you on the stuff that you do on the whiteboard. So I think there are some variations of it, but that means you'll have to work in that area to make yourself known. Create your own branding. I think that's something we haven't talked about, but there are ways to create your own brand. Blogs, conference talks, put out ideas, start an open source project. There are a multitude of ways of building an engineering brand. I think that would help as well.
One thing though to say, I think it's a good question to ask, but if I'm an individual looking for a job, it's not a productive question for me, because you're not going to change the process. This is the process, and what you can do is prepare for it. Like I want to go to Hawaii, and domestic carriers seat width sucks, and I'm crammed like this. But if you want to go to Hawaii, that's what you're going to do, right? So.
I'm loving the analogies. Go to Hawaii, bad apples, apples and apples, apples and oranges.
I was hoping you'd say bad orange, but
yeah,
you went with it.
Hi.
That's nothing to do with Apple. I know. It's only my opinion.
Hi. So so I'm just continuing the same question over here, and I totally understand the scalability of recruitment and the efforts that are needed, and we need objective bias when we are hiring somebody. I totally understand that. And I'm also thinking at the same time, so I came from India, and India, there is a lot of population and a lot of students. And when college admissions are done in India a long time back, not now necessarily, when college admissions were done in India, there were lots of students who want to get into very good colleges or want to get into colleges. So I'm just comparing that with the recruitment over here, where there are lots of people who want to get into very good companies or general companies, and there is a problem of scale. And one of the ways the college admissions were done back in India when I was there were, you do your homework, you prep, you study, you do everything, and then there are standardized tests. There are some standardized tests, and you get kind of a score and things like that. And admissions are based on that score, and candidates or students don't have to do that again and again for each company, or they don't have to just have one 30-minute session or a 1-hour session to prove themselves. I'm just wondering, maybe there are other ways to solve this scalability, recruitment problems, combining some of the solutions like this, where we can get better candidates also, but not have to go through, I'm totally there for prep, but just to do this for each and every company and keep on doing it until an infinite loop, until you break out where you get somebody, you get a job.
So no, you're not preparing for each and every company, right? You're preparing once. You're getting better at algorithms, you're getting better at designing systems, you're getting better at your behavioral answers. You are sharpening your domain skills, right? Those are the 4 things that these companies look for, right? Now, beyond that, it is in the interview room, right? If that person happens to ask you about a project you had done 10 years ago, then that's their curiosity, right? That's the reality of that moment. That's where it's the date, not a test. Right? Your preparation is very much like a test.
See, I think the other thing that's really important is what Yanni said, which is that this is the process. Now, there are people thinking about whether this process should change, for sure. But that is not what we are here to discuss, because that is something that's going to take time to change, if at all, and we don't know what the alternative is. So right now, if you are in the mindset of thinking that you want to up-level, that goes with everybody, then this is the process that you have to work with, right? It's nice to think about what could be next, and it's an interesting question, because who knows whether this is the right way or the wrong way. But right now, this is the way, right? And so have that mindset, because that's the only way you're going to win at this point. The other way is what Mona said, which is a much longer time-consuming way. Figure out your brand, and that's a completely different way of approaching it, right? But if you are somebody who's interviewing right now, this is the way, right? And so you have to prepare keeping that in mind. Sorry, last question, the gentleman in the back had a question. So you guys can come outside chatting with us as well, but we do have to wrap this up because of the room.
Yeah, just real quick and related to the same topic. I agree that this is the way. That's not going to change anytime soon. But I'm wondering, from someone who's been in a hiring position, I've have the opportunity, even though I'm quite young, to build a team from scratch and whatnot. And I wonder if you guys have any different methods that are different from the standard way of going into an interview, grilling somebody in the whiteboard, asking them to reverse a binary tree, that have worked successfully for you. Because I agree that the goal is for actually to find people that are aligned with your company goals, with your group goals, with and making sure that it doesn't turn out to be a bad apple, right? It's actually somebody that in the interview process, it's very hard to actually find those skills, because people who go to the interview, they go with a single motivation of getting the job. So they're going to portray their best selves. And in my experience, when I've been in that position where I've built people on the whiteboard, it's been harder, much harder for me to see those skills than actually, for example, sitting down and pairing program with that person.
So,
right? And doing things that are more practical and related. For example, I love to give problems of my everyday company and then asking them to solve it and see how they come up with that.
Okay, I'm so sorry, we have to wrap up because I think the next session is about to start, but
there is a session called Eng Residency in a lot of companies, by the way.
Yeah. So
I will talk.
I want to thank you all, thank the panel. We've got a bunch of other sessions.
Thank you so much, guys.